In the waning years of the 7th century BC, the once invincible Assyrian Empire lay battered by endless wars, internal power struggles, and restless subject peoples. In Babylonia, heavy taxation, forced labor drafts for distant campaigns, and the imposition of foreign Assyrian cults sparked growing resentment among both native Babylonians and Chaldean tribes. Sensing the moment, Nabopolassar, an ambitious provincial governor likely of Chaldean origin, seized Babylon in 626 BC and proclaimed a revolt aimed not merely at autonomy, but at overthrowing Assyrian rule itself. Nabopolassar's first task was to rally popular support. He portrayed himself as the restorer of Marduk's city, promising to rebuild temples, revive traditional festivals, and end the burdens imposed by Assyria's governors. Within a year, his forces controlled southern Babylonia and had begun fortifying Babylon's ancient walls. Rather than face the Assyrian army alone, Nabopolassar forged a strategic alliance with the Medes under King Cyaxares, whose own kingdom to the north was eager to break free from Assyrian domination. By 615 BC, coordinated Median and Babylonian attacks had captured the Assyrian heartland. Assur fell first, and then Nimrud. The crowning achievement of this coalition came in 612 BC, when a combined Medo-Babylonian army surrounded and sacked Nineveh after a protracted siege. The destruction of Assyria's capital shattered its authority. The last Assyrian ruler, Ashurbanipal II, fled into exile. Nabopolassar pressed on, seizing Haran and securing the Tigris-Euphrates corridor. By the end of this campaign, the Assyrian state had effectively disintegrated, leaving Nabopolassar free to declare himself king of Babylon and king of Sumer and Akkad. With foreign foes vanquished, Nabopolassar turned to consolidating his new empire. He immediately set about repairing Babylon's crumbling infrastructure. Canals were cleared of silt, granaries restocked, and the great temples of Asagila and Etemenanki were restored. He re-established the Akita New Year festival, reinforcing the sacred bond between king, god Marduk, and people. These religious and civic restorations rekindled Babylon's prestige as Mesopotamia's cultural and spiritual capital. Administratively, Nabopolassar laid enduring foundations for governance. He appointed trusted Chaldean and Babylonian officials to oversee former Assyrian provinces, instituting regular tribute collection and legal courts. Local elites received land grants and temple endowments in exchange for loyalty, creating a network of vested supporters. Recognizing the importance of smooth succession, he prepared his son Nebuchadnezzar II for leadership, mentoring him in both strategy and priestly duties. Nabopolassar's revolt thus accomplished more than the mere toppling of a foreign power. It marked the emergence of a distinctly Neo-Babylonian state, one that blended military opportunism with religious legitimacy and prudent state-building. His alliance with the Medes not only dismantled Assyria, but also laid the groundwork for the shifting Near Eastern geopolitics of the 6th century BC. By 605 BC, Nabopolassar had transformed Babylon from a vassal city into the heart of a resurgent empire, setting the stage for its golden age under Nebuchadnezzar II, and leaving a legacy of visionary revolt turned sovereign rule. When Nebuchadnezzar II ascended the throne in 605 BC, succeeding his father Nabopolassar, he inherited a newly consolidated Neo-Babylonian kingdom still securing the ruins of the Assyrian heartland. Yet Nebuchadnezzar was no mere caretaker. He embarked on nearly half a century of military campaigns and diplomatic initiatives that would extend Babylon's influence from the Persian Gulf to the Levant and cement its status as the region's preeminent power. His first test came at Carchemish on the Euphrates, where in 605 BC, he decisively defeated the Egyptians under Pharaoh Necho II, consolidating Babylonian control over Syria and securing lucrative trade routes between Anatolia and Egypt. This victory effectively ended Egyptian interference in Mesopotamian affairs and opened the corridor to the Mediterranean for Babylonian merchants and military expeditions. Turning his attention southeast, Nebuchadnezzar campaigned into Elam and the Iranian highlands to suppress lingering Assyrian loyalists and secure the empire's eastern flank. Fortresses in the Zagros foothills, at sites such as Humbentippa, fell after protracted sieges. Babylonian garrisons were established at strategic points, while deportations of resistant tribes helped neutralize future rebellions. These actions stabilized the volatile borderlands and ensured a steady flow of tribute in gold, timber, and metal. In the west, Nebuchadnezzar's campaigns were even more extensive. Between 598 and 597 BC, he laid siege to Jerusalem, capturing King Jehoiakim and deporting Judah's elite to Babylon, events immortalized in the Hebrew Bible. A second siege in 587 BC obliterated Jerusalem, destroyed Solomon's temple, and led to the Babylonian exile, signaling Babylon's mastery over Judah and its complete subjugation. These operations showcased Nebuchadnezzar's ability to combine protracted siegecraft with psychological warfare. Walls were razed, monuments razed, and local elites replaced with loyal administrators. Further west, Nebuchadnezzar campaigned into Phoenicia, capturing Sidon and Tyre after multi-year sieges. Tyre, an island stronghold, resisted until 573 BC, when its supplies were finally cut off. By installing puppet rulers and garrisoning key port cities, Nebuchadnezzar secured maritime access, enabling Babylon to import cedar wood from Lebanon and export its agricultural surplus. Control of the Levant also allowed him to levy maritime tribute, expanding the empire's revenue base. Nebuchadnezzar's military machine relied on well-trained infantry divisions armed with composite bows, slingmen from the Aramean hinterlands, and chariot detachments for shock tactics. Siegecraft innovations, such as bent timber battering rams and elevated siege ramps, were adapted from earlier Mesopotamian traditions but refined under his direction. Logistical proficiency ensured sustained campaigns. Supply trains of grain, dried meat, and water skins moved along improved canal road networks, while elite units secured waterways with riverborne patrols. Beyond pure conquest, Nebuchadnezzar also employed diplomacy to stabilize newly acquired territories. Vassal treaties with Arabian tribes guaranteed safe passage through desert oases. Local priest kings and city councils retained nominal autonomy under Babylonian overlordship. Tribute obligations were codified on clay prisms, specifying payments in silver talents, livestock, and luxury goods. By the time of his death in 562 BC, Nebuchadnezzar had transformed Babylon into an empire stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean shores, a domain unified under centralized command, yet administered through a network of satrapies and local client rulers. The rapid mobilization of armies, the mastery of siege warfare, and the deft use of diplomacy underpinned this expansion. More than mere territorial aggrandizement, Nebuchadnezzar's campaigns secured vital trade arteries, enriched the royal coffers, and extended Babylon's cultural influence across a diverse mosaic of peoples. Ultimately, Nebuchadnezzar's legacy was twofold. As a warrior king who reasserted Mesopotamia's ascendancy in the ancient world, and as a ruler whose conquests created the political and economic framework for Babylon's subsequent cultural renaissance. His campaigns reshaped the Near Eastern map and set the stage for the empire's golden age of architectural and intellectual achievement. In the aftermath of decades of warfare and expansion under Nebuchadnezzar II, Babylon stood poised to showcase its power not only through military triumphs, but also through monumental architecture, vibrant cultural patronage, and religious revival. Over the course of his long reign, Nebuchadnezzar transformed the city into a dazzling capital whose renowned edifices, many of which still capture the imagination today, embodied the empire's wealth, piety, and artistic innovation. At the heart of this transformation lay the restoration and embellishment of the temple precincts dedicated to Marduk, Babylon's chief deity. The Asagila complex, originally laid out centuries earlier, was expanded with new ziggurats, processional avenues, and richly decorated chambers. Nebuchadnezzar commissioned glazed brick reliefs depicting Marduk's triumph over chaos, integrating scenes of divine creation with inscriptions that celebrated the king's role as the god's chosen steward. Adjacent stood the magnificent Etemenanki, the so-called Tower of Babel, reconstructed to rise perhaps 7 stories high, its mud brick core encased in vibrant blue tiles and crowned with a golden shrine. Beyond these cult centers, the king undertook an ambitious urban redevelopment of Babylon itself. The city's walls, already famed by Herodotus, were thickened and raised, enclosing an area of some 9 square kilometers with defensive ramparts punctuated by 7 grand gates. The most celebrated of these, the Ishtar Gate, featured alternating rows of striding lions, dragons, and aurochs in molded polychrome glazed brick. The gate's towering arches led to the processional way, a broad boulevard laid with stone blocks and flanked by splendid reliefs, on which festival processions wound their way during the New Year's Akita celebration. To support the city's burgeoning population, estimated at perhaps 200,000 inhabitants, Nebuchadnezzar improved water management and public works. An intricate network of canals and aqueducts, fed by the Euphrates and its tributaries, was repaired and extended. These waterways supplied drinking water to temples and palaces, irrigated the lush hanging gardens, whose precise form remains debated among scholars, and enabled river traffic to ply the city's internal docks. Public granaries, lined with fired brick and partitioned into vaults, stored surplus grain to buffer against drought or blockade. Culturally, Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar became a nexus of scholarship and artistry. The royal court patronized scribal schools where students copied cuneiform texts, astronomical diaries, medical treatises, and epic poems onto clay tablets. The Neo-Babylonian period saw the compilation of the Enuma Elish creation epic in its final form, celebrating Marduk's cosmic role. Musicians, dancers, and acrobats performed at temple festivals and court banquets, while itinerant craftsmen from across the empire brought new motifs. Elamite inlaid metalwork, Aramean textiles, and Egyptian faience. Religious life itself was reinvigorated. The Akita festival, once limited to Babylon, now drew pilgrims from distant provinces who processed along the processional way bearing offerings and renewing their loyalty to king and god. Nebuchadnezzar's inscriptions emphasize his personal piety. He claimed to hear Marduk's voice in dreams and to enact divine visions in stone and brick. This theological framing bolstered his legitimacy among both native Babylonians and subject peoples who shared similar Mesopotamian religious traditions. Yet Babylon's cultural renaissance was no mere revival of the past. Artistic innovations blended traditional Mesopotamian forms with influences brought by mercantile contacts. Egyptian-style lapis inlays, Achaemenid cylinder seal carving, and Greek-inspired naturalistic animal motifs. The result was a cosmopolitan artistic idiom that resonated across the empire, from Uruk to Tyre. Nebuchadnezzar's building program and cultural patronage thus achieved dual goals: to honor the gods in grand fashion and to impress subjects and visitors with Babylon's unrivaled majesty. By reshaping the urban landscape and fostering a vibrant intellectual milieu, he ensured that Babylon would endure not only as a military and political capital, but as a beacon of Mesopotamian civilization whose influence would echo into later empires. The expansion and cultural efflorescence of the Neo-Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar II demanded an equally sophisticated administrative and economic machinery to sustain it. From the royal palace in Babylon to provincial centers at Ur, Sippar, and Carchemish, a network of officials, record keepers, and tax collectors ensured that tribute, resources, and labor flowed seamlessly into the imperial coffers and public works. At the apex of this system stood the king himself, advised by a council of high officials. The vizier, the treasurer, and the crown prince, often entrusted with governance duties as co-regent. Royal decrees, inscribed on clay prisms and cylinder seals, standardized taxation rates, land ownership regulations, and judicial procedures across the realm. The famous late-period legal reforms attributed to Nebuchadnezzar introduced model contracts for loan agreements and labor hires, reflecting a more sophisticated commercial environment. Provincial governance relied on a hierarchy of governors, Aku, or provincial administrators, and Rabsari, or royal appointees, who oversaw tribute collection, local defense, and temple-state relations. Each province maintained a granary network. Cereal tithes were assessed on landholders, stored in fortified storehouses, and distributed to soldiers, laborers, and temple personnel. Interprovincial caravans transported barley, dates, wool, and handicrafts to Babylon, while importing metals, timber, and luxury goods from Elam and Anatolia. The empire's economy rested on both agrarian output and long-distance trade. Annual Nile inundations had no bearing in Mesopotamia. Instead, irrigation canals fed by the Tigris and Euphrates provided water to fertile alluvial fields. Temple estates, particularly those of Marduk at Babylon and Shamash at Sippar, controlled vast swaths of agricultural land, employing corvée labor and tenant farmers under sharecropping arrangements. Palace-administered estates complemented this system, producing wine, oil, and textiles for the royal household. Commerce thrived along riverine routes. Merchant guilds, regulated by royal charters, assembled cargoes of grain and textiles bound for ports on the Mediterranean and Persian Gulf. Babylonian merchants established trading factories at Carchemish, Tarsus, and beyond, facilitating exchanges in silver, lapis lazuli, and frankincense. Standardized shekels and minas, minted in Babylon and regional centers, enabled ease of transaction. Weights and measures were periodically calibrated by royal inspectors to prevent fraud. Temples played a dual economic role as cultic centers and banking institutions. Priests extended loans secured by grain or land, issued receipts that functioned as negotiable instruments, and mediated disputes through temple courts. This intertwining of religion and finance not only enriched the priesthood, but also provided credit mechanisms necessary for large-scale agricultural and commercial ventures. In matters of security, the empire maintained standing forces composed of native Babylonian levies and foreign auxiliaries, Arameans, Scythians, and Medes, each paid in rations and land grants. Border fortresses at Haran and Carchemish protected trade arteries, while river patrols safeguarded against piracy and banditry. Yet the administrative apparatus was not without challenges. Rebellions in distant provinces, such as Elam and Gutium fringe territories, required costly military interventions. Corruption among tax officials and bureaucratic overreach sometimes led to peasant revolts, prompting the king to issue amnesty decrees and reduce certain levies. Seasonal famines, driven by canal silting or climatic fluctuations, strained temple granaries and necessitated emergency distributions. Despite these pressures, the Neo-Babylonian administrative and economic system proved remarkably resilient. Its combination of centralized oversight, provincial autonomy, religious banking, and regulated commerce sustained a multi-ethnic empire. By the time of Nebuchadnezzar's death, this network had become the institutional backbone that allowed Babylon to flourish politically, culturally, and economically until its dramatic fall in 539 BC. Nebuchadnezzar II's death in 562 BC ushered in a period of political uncertainty that exposed underlying tensions within the Neo-Babylonian state. His successor, Marduk, reigned briefly before being deposed by Neriglissar. It was under Nabonidus, who seized the throne in 556 BC, that Babylonian society confronted profound internal strains, setting the stage for the empire's ultimate collapse. Nabonidus was from Haran and a priest of the moon god Sin. He pursued unusual religious policies that alienated Babylon's powerful priesthood of Marduk. He prioritized the restoration of the Sin temple at Haran over the temples in Babylon, spending years away from the capital and leaving governance in the hands of his son, Belshazzar. This absentee monarchy weakened royal authority and emboldened factional court politics. The influential Marduk priesthood, already chafing under mercurial leadership, viewed Nabonidus's devotion to Sin as sacrilegious, undermining the king's religious legitimacy. Economically, Nabonidus's long absence disrupted temple grain management. His neglect of canal maintenance led to localized breakdowns in irrigation cycles of siltation, and diminished water flow hurt crop yields in southern provinces. As temple granaries dwindled, shortages spread, prompting unrest among rural communities. Meanwhile, Belshazzar's attempts to assuage discontent through lavish entertainments and high-cost building projects in Babylon strained the treasury. Administratively, Nabonidus's focus on Haran led to decentralization of authority. Regional governors and palace officials in Babylon assumed greater autonomy, some openly withheld tribute. In the empire's western provinces, local elites exploited the power vacuum to bolster their own tax levies. The once efficient tribute system faltered, and palace correspondences from this period plead for payments that never arrived. Belshazzar's regency, immortalized in the biblical writing on the wall, was marred by palace intrigue. His opulent feasts, intended to project strength, only underscored the disconnect between the court's luxury and the populace's hardships. In 540 BC, revolts erupted in Borsippa and Nippur. Belshazzar dispatched military expeditions that quelled dissent, but at heavy cost. Moreover, Nabonidus's foreign policy missteps further weakened Babylon. His overtures to the rising Persian chief Cyrus went unanswered, while he neglected to secure alliances with former Medo-Babylonian partners. As Persia consolidated under Cyrus the Great, Babylon stood diplomatically isolated. By 539 BC, Cyrus's forces approached Babylon from the east. The city's defenses, once impregnable walls and moat systems, remained well-built but undermanned. When Cyrus diverted authorities' attention with festival celebrations, his troops entered unopposed through a canal gate. Nabonidus was captured in the temple precinct at Sippar. Belshazzar was slain, and the Marduk priesthood, seeking to reassert order, welcomed Cyrus as the new king of Babylon and land of Sumer and Akkad. Thus, the final years of the Chaldean dynasty were defined by religious discord, administrative breakdown, and economic distress. The weakening of royal presence, palace factionalism, and the king's controversial piety alienated key power brokers. These internal fractures, combined with Persian opportunism, brought an abrupt end to Babylon's two-century ascendancy. In the autumn of 539 BC, the world's most splendid city fell not in epic battle, but through a coup of strategy, timing, and political calculation orchestrated by Cyrus II of Persia. Having subjugated the Median kingdom and extended his reach into Asia Minor, Cyrus turned his gaze on Babylon, a state still reeling from internal strife and weakened institutions. By understanding Babylon's vulnerabilities, Cyrus not only captured the city intact, but also portrayed himself as Babylon's liberator, setting a precedent for how empires might expand with minimal destruction and maximum legitimacy. Cyrus's approach combined military acumen with psychological and religious insight. According to Babylonian chronicles, his army marched along the Euphrates Canal system, digging a diversion channel that temporarily lowered river levels along the city walls. On the night of October 16th, the Persian troops entered through an unmanned watergate, either abandoned by negligent palace guards distracted by Belshazzar's festivities or opened by Cyrus's agents. Crucial to this bloodless takeover was Cyrus's careful cultivation of Babylonian sentiment. Long before the siege, he sent emissaries and gifts to the city's priesthood, promising to restore temples, return deported captives, and respect Marduk's supremacy. The Babylonian Chronicle records that citizens, eager for stability after decades of turmoil under Nabonidus, rose in the streets to greet Cyrus as king of the universe, expelling the remnants of Chaldean loyalists. Cyrus's policy of religious tolerance bolstered his claim. The Cyrus cylinder, a clay inscription now housed in the British Museum, celebrates his restoration of sanctuaries, repatriation of exiles, including the Judean captives in Babylon, and respectful treatment of local customs. By positioning himself as appointed by Marduk, Cyrus undercut the Chaldean priesthood's earlier grievances and won the support of temple hierarchies. Administratively, Cyrus absorbed Babylon into the Etemenid provincial system, appointing Gabaru as satrap, but retaining many native officials in their posts. The existing tribute network, canal management protocols, and temple banking institutions were left largely intact, ensuring continuity of daily life and commerce. Babylon thus became one of the empire's wealthiest satrapies, its grain and artisan goods fueling Persian ambitions across 3 continents. Economically, Cyrus's conquest imposed lighter taxation than Nabonidus, and royal mints continued to issue silver shekels and gold derricks for local and imperial use. Babylonian scholarship, medical practice, and astronomical observation, enshrined in the city's academies, flourished under Persian patronage. Greek mercenaries and Eastern artisans alike found lucrative employ in the empire's new capital. Cyrus's conquest of Babylon stands as a masterstroke of strategy and statecraft, a military operation that combined engineering innovation, diplomatic overtures, and religious accommodation. It exemplified a mode of conquest that preserved the conquered society's core institutions while extending imperial authority. The success of this approach reverberated through subsequent Persian expansions, as well as Alexander's later triumph and his own attempts to legitimize rule through local traditions. By 539 BC, Babylon's long chapter as an independent great power closed. Yet under Cyrus, it became a jewel in the crown of the Achaemenid Empire, its cultural legacies and administrative achievements perpetuated on a grander scale. The story of Babylon's fall thus marks both an end and a beginning, the end of the Chaldean dynasty and the rise of a Persian imperial order that would, in turn, shape the course of Near Eastern history. Thank you for exploring the Neo-Babylonian saga with Ancient Odyssey. From Nabopolassar's bold revolt and Nebuchadnezzar's mighty expansions to the city's architectural rebirth and its dramatic fall under Cyrus. If you enjoyed diving into the strategies, culture, and legacies of one of history's most remarkable empires, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more adventures through time's hidden chapters. Until next time, stay curious and stay bold.